Keep back, you kids there. Yeah, what's all this?
Keep back there.
Keep back, me? Do you know who you're talking to?
I give you a last chance to leave me alone.
Give me a last chance. You've committed assault, this what you've done, and you can come along to the station with me. Come along now, come quietly, unless you want me to put the handcuffs on.
Stop where you are. You don't know what you're doing.
I know what I'm doing, all right. Come on.
Get hold of him.
Lock him up. All right, you fools. You've brought it on yourselves. Everything would have come right if you'd only left me alone. You've driven me near madness with your peering through the keyholes and gaping through the curtains. And now you'll suffer for it. You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you. There's a souvenir for you. And one for you. I'll show you who I am and what I
am. Look, he's all eaten away.
Huh? How do you like that,
Horror Hound, welcome to episode 14 of the Black Sunday Tapes Classic Horror. This is part 4 of our Universal Monster series, so that can only mean one thing. I am, of course, talking about James Whale's The Invisible Man from 1933. Absolute classic. I have made no mistake about my absolute love for James Whale. In the Frankenstein episode, we are back with another James Whale masterpiece. Michael, this was the first time you watched this, correct?
Correct. It's now the first 4 times I've seen it, so.
Now the first 4 times, which is usual for you.
It is. And, I mean, that being said, I have not done that with everything that we've podcasted about, but...
That is true. That is true. But you are very much enjoying these Universal Monster scenes, which brings a huge smile to my face.
This was the harshest first watch for me, because it was more than a little theatrical.
Yes, very. Very. So on that, what was your reactions on the first watch and then through to the fourth watch?
Again, just because Whale knows what he's doing with sort of like pace and tone and what he's going for. And what he was going for was, I guess, a little more comedic.
Yes.
But here's the thing, though, is like comedic question mark. Like, I guess, we're watching it in 2020. We're not in 1933. Maybe in 1933 it's fucking hilarious. But to me, I giggled a few times, but a lot of the times that they were trying to force humor, it made it a little more uncomfortable for me. Like, in as much as like the townspeople were being like funny and over the top, but like when the Invisible Man was making jokes, I was like, this isn't funny. This is creepy.
Yes, yeah, I know where you're coming from,
which I appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely there's definitely a dark comedy to it. And I don't think that was any secret in 1933. I think James Whale, coming off the back of Frankenstein and another Universal film, which were quite serious horror films, he definitely wanted to put a bit of dark comedy into this. James Whale was known for being a bit of a prankster himself, a bit of a... Okay. Yeah, he loved comedy, and there's stories on the set of this.
Yeah, he couldn't stop laughing at the barkeep, the lady.
Oh, the barkeep, Una O'Connor.
Yeah.
She pops up in The Bride of Frankenstein as well. So, you're gonna... But he would not... That is one of the most famous stories from the set is... He would have it. He'd have the take, and he'd make her do another one just because he loved watching her. He loved watching how over the top she was. And she is over the top, right? You want to talk about ridiculously over the top stage acting?
That's why at first I was like, "Whoa, this one's gonna be a rough watch." Because wow, I get it, but wow. Yeah, and then it's like that was totally the intent. Okay, and you loosen up and it grows on you. But yeah, on first watch, man, it was almost too much.
When you're coming off the back of Dracula, Frankenstein,
I mean, really though,
which are pretty fucking straight films. You're coming off the back of them, then you're going into this. wow. I mean, like
Well,
James Wow
also like before we
really
get too
threw a
far
curve.
removed from it, like the I think part of the reason too was I was like, was some of the comedy purposeful or not on the first view was because some of it really was just kind of man, you could argue if it was trying to be comedy or not, if it was just the performance of the actor. But
Okay.
then you can't possibly read the performance way later on of it's almost near the end too. Actually, and what made it make more sense to me was I realized what scene it took place just after. So there's a scene where like the Invisible Man, spoilers, heck of spoilers. So he like derails a train and kills 100 people. Now
Oh
that
yes.
sounds way worse than it could possibly have been in 1933, but it was still really gnarly for
Yeah.
1933. You didn't see
Yeah.
bodies or anything, but it was still a really gnarly model train derailing,
Yep.
and
And it's the
then
sound effects as well, man.
immediately, well, yeah, and the sound you hear
Yeah.
screaming and fire and
Yeah. Yeah.
crashing, yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But then like the well, he's got to sleep sometime. We can catch him while he's sleeping, and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, how do we go from you could almost argue subtle comedy to like what is this?
Yeah.
Like Saturday morning cartoons weren't a thing at the time, but like that style, like what is that? Why? And then I'm like, oh well, it's just after one of the gnarliest scenes imaginable at the time, so he was trying to lighten the mood. But I don't know. Anyway, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's exactly it. That's exactly it, man. You've hit the nail on the head. It was a you deliver which is still kind of used in horror today. It's actually
Yeah,
a great
yeah.
technique of you build people up with a very horrific scene or a jump scare, or as Hitchcock would do, you build suspense and then you let the audience down, right? It's like a roller coaster, right? You've probably heard of horror films. The way a horror film should go is like a roller coaster. It should be up, it should come back down, it should be up, it should come back down. And I think that James Wow maybe was never better at that than with The Invisible Man, because
He does do
there
it quite well
is,
here. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. There is like great comedy moments in this. But I do think, especially the more you watch it, as you now have done, the comedy does lend itself. Like Una O'Connor as the barkeep, like, yeah, come on,
Mhm.
she's ridiculously over the top.
I
That
mean,
is
that
what it
cop
is.
just swinging his
Yeah,
nightstick around,
yeah,
like
exactly. Right. Just like slapstick. But then in terms of Claude Rains and the way he plays some of the stuff over the top, and Claude Rains was known for, after this, I mean, this was Claude Rains' first American film, I believe. But after this, he was, he played some very straight characters very famously in Casablanca.
see,
And
and I have seen Casablanca, but I've only seen it maybe twice, although once was
okay,
theatrically. We'll get to that some other time. But so like I had seen him before, but it didn't put two and two together. So I'm sitting here watching it, and I'm like, and
right, gotcha.
again, spoilers, you don't see his face until the very end. And
Yep,
so the whole movie, you've got this guy with this commanding voice. Like the dude's got a
very.
voice kind of like mine, like just down there. And then you see this dude who's like, he's almost effeminate. Like you're like, whoa, that's the
At
guy with
the
that
end,
voice.
yeah, at the end he is, yeah, definitely. A lot more so than in something like Casablanca, definitely.
Okay, so who is he in Casablanca?
Captain Lewis Reynolds. So,
Is that like
at
the
the
main bad guy?
no, that's like the main cop. So, right at the end of the film, the very, very famous end line, probably the most famous end line in any cinema, Louis, I believe this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship,
Yeah.
is said to him.
Oh,
He
okay,
is the guy
okay.
walking off with Humphrey Bogart at the end of the film.
Right on.
Yeah, so he, like, extremely famous role, extremely important role in that film. Yeah, as the Invisible Man, Jack Griffin. Yeah, he's really good, and he definitely uses the voice to, the best of his ability, which he has to, really, because he hasn't really got much
Yeah.
else to work with
Well, I
for
didn't get to do a
most of the
lot of
film.
research, but one of the things I found interesting was it Karloff was offered, but he said no because you don't get to see him. And so
Hmm.
that's when Whale decided to go for the most commanding voice that he knew, which was our buddy Rains here.
Yeah, so there's some interesting stories around the whole Karloff thing. So apparently, when Wow was originally going to do this film, he wasn't really sure who he wanted for the Invisible Man. Karloff was suggested to him. Obviously, Karloff being a huge star he was at this point, having worked with him before. Some people say that him and James Wow had a falling out. Others say that Karloff and Universal had a falling out.
Okay.
Yeah, depending on which historian you ask, the story differs. but I think it's definitely true. Karloff had a falling out with someone, and left the, or I say left the picture. He was never really part of it, but yeah, he was out. And then they needed a actor for the role, and they were finding it really hard. They had no idea who was going to play it. And then, as legend has it, Claude Rains had just filmed. I can't remember if it was an audition for this or an audition for something else, and they were playing it in a screening room, and James Wow just overheard the voice.
Oh,
and,
yeah, I did see this. Yeah.
And then just based on that was like,
that guy,
whoever that guy, don't care what he looks like, just that voice. I need that voice. And yeah, and that was it. And Claude Rains went on to become quite a Hollywood legend in his own right. He worked with everyone from James Wow to Casablanca to Hitchcock in Notorious as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, he incredible actor, and it all kind of come from that one little screening room thing, if legend is to be believed. But bringing that round to the whole comedy element of the film, Claude Rains, while as the Invisible Man, running around, the shirt and all that kind of stuff, that's very comedic as well, right? That's very, he plays it very comedic. His delivery is very comedic. It's very black comedy.
Since we're touching on that, I'm not even gonna lie, man. My jaw was on the damn floor. I'm like, this isn't the greatest thing I'd ever seen, but I was like, is this? I didn't think this shit came around to like the fucking 50s. Like, how are they doing this? How the fuck are they doing this? They don't have blue screen. What's going on? Like,
they essentially invented.
And when he unwraps his head, like, even though, like, because I'm in the film, incredible. I know how they did it. I was like, oh my god, they did that in 33.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. You're making the stuff up at this point.
Right?
You're just making up how to do it. Yeah, it's incredible. So you said you found out how they done it?
Oh, yeah, that was one of the things I found out. It was just Black Velvet. He filmed it like he was all in Black Velvet, and then he put the clothes on over that. And then I guess then they were just doing old school. It wouldn't be rotoscoping. It would have been like they filmed it twice and they cut it out and did it frame by frame or whatever.
Yeah. So it was so you're right. They would wrap the actor in Black Velvet, or they would wrap the body parts you wanted to disappear in Black Velvet, and then they would shoot that actor against a Black Velvet background. So when you shot, it just disappears, right? Like the parts you want to be invisible just like they go into that black background.
Correct.
And then you take the shot of once you process it, you've got the clothes on their own, missing the Black Velvet bit, and you just put it over the top of the film. I mean, it sounds quite simple now, but back in 1933, absolutely incredible. I can only imagine, and I'm glad you said you had that reaction, because I had exactly the same reaction when I first watched it. Yeah, it just blew me away. So can you imagine the reaction of people in 1933?
Because I was like, if I'm impressed right now, like, how in Christ's name were people not freaking out? They're like, is an invisible man for real?
Well, I guarantee you would have some people that thought it was witchcraft.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Without doubt, man.
I mean, absolutely ran out of the screening room, as it were, being a tent with a sheet at the train coming at them. I mean, come on.
Yeah, exactly. It's it really, really does blow the mind how credible those effects are. And just a little shout out to the visual effects artist who come up with them effects, was called John Fulton, I believe. But he has, I mean, go and look at his IMDb when you get a chance. He's got over 200 visual effects credits, I believe. Yeah, like he become like the guy. He was on everything, man. He would do like 10, 20, 30 films a year. Just to, there weren't anyone doing that stuff. So he pioneered a lot of techniques that would be used for years to come, but then techniques that also would evolve and develop in other ways that would then give way to the effects that you come to see in Star Wars and stuff like that in the 70s, right? Like a lot of those techniques, we're talking about filming on the Black Velvet. There was a lot of techniques in Star Wars that were filmed exactly the same way, where you film against the background. So we touched on the cast. We brought up Claude Rains. We brought up Una O'Connor.
Okay, so before we get off the cast, I definitely have to say, like, one of the things I appreciated the most about the movie was the human faces. I don't know how else to say it. Like Like the dude at the very beginning who's like playing darts and smoking a pipe, that face doesn't exist anymore. They don't make that human.
Right, gotcha. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And everybody, like every background character, even if they're being a cartoon, like the way that the younger person that works at the inn like leans in while they're talking about, it's at the very beginning, like when he's like, "Did you hear about the blah blah blah's little boy?" And she's just like leaning in and laughing with them.
Yeah.
Like they just don't make humans that look like this anymore. Like
It is true. It is true. I mean, that's been said a lot, isn't it? Like movie stars especially don't look like movie stars used to. There is something about like it's kind of an age thing as well. Like everyone now looks so much younger than people did back then, you know. Like it does shock me sometimes when you see some of these people who are the leading actors in film, and then when you look up their age and they were like 21 and you're like 21, you were like 46. You weren't 21. But yeah, it does. There's definitely, I get what you mean.
Okay, so then question, like how old was the dude who was the romantic lead in this movie? Because it felt like he was supposed to be in his 20s and he looked like he was solidly 52.
I don't know how old he was when they shot it, but I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. They just did, man. Different time. People look different. They looked older. People grew up a lot faster.
Yeah.
Sound like that, I guess. I don't know. Who knows? Not as many makeup products.
So you got the one dude, Jack, and then you have his romantic interest, Flora. And I was like, really? So we got Jack and Rose even in 1933?
Yeah. Yeah.
It popped in my brain. It had to be said.
I see where you come from, man. I see where you come from. So, anyone else in the cast that stood out to you?
I mean, I touched on it a little bit, but I really appreciated Jeffers, the cop. Like I just did. Like the cop of the town, the guy who's waving his little nightstick around.
Oh yeah.
He was
he's absolutely incredible.
Perfectly doltish.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely incredible. It really is.
So
a lot of them are though, especially like the side characters, man. The side characters, they all really, really pop off the screen, don't they? As is the case with a lot of these classic films, not just classic horror, classic film in general.
Well, along the lines of Flora, so she was kind of the roughest thing for me on my first watch, just because like she was so classic hysterical woman, so like overly shaky in your face about her. Well, what are we going to do? And I couldn't, and I'm like, why is she in this movie? And then there's that scene way later where you've got like an extreme close up on her, and her eyes are like super shiny, and she's looking up, and it was like, oh, I get it.
Oh, gotcha.
I know why she's here now. Okay.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's you do get a lot of some of those performances they don't age as well as others do. And I do feel like, unfortunately, the female performances sometimes age a little bit worse than the male performances. And I think that's genuinely
it's what they were given, though. Yeah,
that's the problem.
It's not their fault.
No, that's it.
But
that's it.
Bring it back around to the
given.
whole Titanic of it all, though. The woman in question, the one we're talking about, the actress, also played Old Rose in Titanic.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, man. I mean,
I found this out after I wrote the note about Jack and Rose. By the way.
Oh, did you really? Oh, no way! I thought that's what you were
feeling that I had, and then I found this out.
Oh, that's so funny. I thought that's what you I when you made that gag, I thought, oh, okay, you're alluding to the fact she was the older Rose in Titanic. That's great.
I think I wrote that note on my first or second view, and I didn't look up like anything really until my third view. So.
Wow. She also one last little note on Gloria Stewart, her name is. She actually lived to be 100 years old.
Right.
Yeah, she was 100 and.
Wasn't she like 97 or whatever when they made it? The Titanic.
Well, the film was shot in 97. She was about 70 odd, 80, I think.
Oh no! Oh really? Oh,
yeah.
So she died kind of recently? Oh shit! I'm sorry.
Yeah, she died. 2009, 2010, something like that. Yeah, I'd have to look it up to be sure, but I know that she was 100 years old. when she died. Yeah, yeah. So that's what a run, eh? Anyone that makes 100 years old, that is incredible to me. It really is. It never ceases to amaze me. Anyone that makes 100 years old, absolutely incredible. But yeah, you're right. She played the old Rose in Titanic, and she was in another Universal James Wow horror film that was actually in between Frankenstein and this, called The Old Dark House, which also starred Boris Karloff. So once we're done with our Universal Monster series, because that isn't really Universal Monsters, even though it was made by Universal and a lot of the people responsible for what we consider the Universal Monsters, it doesn't really fall into that bracket. But that would definitely be one we cover, because it's a very interesting film.
Call us on it if we don't, people, because I'm okay with this.
Very interesting film, man. Very interesting film. Karloff is incredible in it, and there is some really, really.
I definitely got to go deeper down that Karloff hole.
Yeah, there's some really cool Jack Pierce makeup as well.
And before we get off the cast, my last day, touching back on Reigns, during it's actually not a bad segue into the production of it all either. The scene where he's kind of wreaking havoc through the town, just like ripping hats off people's heads and stealing bikes. When the laugh that he delivers, I laughed extra, maybe a little too hard at that, because the exact way that he laughs is a laugh that will come out of me occasionally.
And really?
It was awkward to hear it from the television.
That's funny.
So
that's pretty cool.
But okay, so like I said, so the all the different stuff flying around, and the bicycle moving on its own as the Invisible Man steals it. The HD was great, like as it has been every single time. But I was like, wow, this is really like I kind of know how they did it, but I'm kind of wondering how they were able to like hide how they did it so well. I didn't see any strings until my fourth passive viewing.
Wow, okay. That's interesting. It's not as they do a very, very, very good job in hiding the strings in this, and hiding the way they achieve those effects, which in later Invisible Man films is not the case, and the effects get steadily worse.
Did they really?
Yeah, especially in one of them. I can't think what one it is, but in one of the, I say Invisible Man films, let's just say the Invisible films, because you've got like the Invisible Woman, you've got Invisible Agent, I think one of them's called. They went like, oh man, they went well off. Actually, one of the funny things we said about last week is how the Mummy, what becomes of like in the first film of the Mummy, that character then doesn't lead on to the sequels, but the Mummy in the Mummy 2 then becomes the Mummy for the rest of the films, right? This one goes one step further. So in every Invisible film, it's a completely different person.
No way, really?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So it's
Well, I mean, spoilers. It does end a certain kind of way.
yeah, it does. Yeah, the effects in number 2, I believe, like up themselves as well. Like there's some really, really good stuff, and if they're not great films, right? They're not, but like a lot of these sequels. But the one, I've always said in every podcast we do, and for the sequels, there are reasons to go back. And normally I would say it's the Jack Pierce makeup. In these, it is definitely the effects. The effects do get better in some of the films, but then as they go on, as you get to the later ones, I believe John Fulton stepped away on a couple of them, and they brought someone else in who obviously did not care as much. A little bit like when Jack Pierce got replaced. And then the makeup went to shit, and that's exactly what happens in this, really, which is unfortunate. But yeah, there's definitely some dodgy stuff where you can see the strings.
Well, now that you got your Patreon going, we're gonna be pumping out some bonus episodes. I got access to the giant collection, even if I can't find them all streaming. So we can make all those happen if y'all want to hear that.
We're definitely going to make some happen. Yeah, we're definitely. And that was a sneaky little shout out for my.
I don't know what you're talking about.
New Patreon account. That was very clever, Michael.
You're welcome.
I like that. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. That was that was really cool. Really, that was very kind of you, sir. So touching on the production side of it, we've spoke about the effects and how they were achieved. What did you think of the overall production design and the look of the film?
I really, really liked it, but I also had some really big issues with it.
Okay, such as?
You'll understand immediately, and if you've seen the movie, hopefully my description will make sense to you. So there's a scene where we meet the doctor who the titular Invisible Man works with, and he's the father of Flora. And then we meet the romantic lead guy, and it all happens in this one little room. And then she runs off in hysterics and goes through a door, and then the camera pans as if to follow them, but then you see that there's like this wall that doesn't extend as would be to make it an entire room, but there's for some reason a door in this wall.
Right, gotcha,
and one might be able to be like, well, that's just how they had to build it so that you could like show that they're going from room to room. But then to like double down on the fact that it's a weird wall with a door in it in the room, they put a plant against the portion that would be breaking the room. And I'm like, what purpose does this serve?
Yeah.
Why are the ceilings 35 feet tall? And I'm like, it's overly theatrical. Again, overly theatrical. Whereas with Frankenstein, there were odd proportions added to, or odd angles added to overly theatrical that made it easier to stomach, more palatable, more filmic for me. And here I was just like, this is like, if I saw this on stage, I'd get it. Why am I looking at something this scale, this odd in a film? Why?
Yeah.
And I went on for too long about it, like this little shot, but at the same time, like that's how I felt about it every time I saw it. Like I didn't get it.
Part of that is down to a lot of these sets were reused. So a lot of the some of these sets,
the money saving thing back in the day. But what do you mean by like they were reused like from the last Universal movie, or do you mean like within the same film?
Yeah, from other films. Films,
yeah, okay. So. I actually worked on a movie that shot in Bronson Canyon, and I was on location for about 5 hours before somebody goes, "You see that cave right there? Yeah, that's the Bat Cave." I was like, "What the hell are you talking about?" Like, you ever watch Batman 66? Of course I've watched Batman 66. Well, that's the Bat Cave. When they drive out the car?
Yeah.
That's the Bat Cave. And I went, what?
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you reuse anything you can.
yeah, and that was the way, man. Like with these films, so based on the way the director would want to shoot it, or the way the cinematographer want to light it, especially, you would have these grand sets. But more so for this, James Wow, I can't speak for the random door and stuff like that, but the big grand sets, the really tall ceilings, the really tall walls, and the plants everywhere, the flowers decorating everything, that is a James Wow trope. He is very well known. That's he's very well known for
that's his Spike Lee dolly camera while somebody's standing on it and everything's moving around them. Yes, okay.
Yeah, it's he would use stuff like that all the time. So you are going to see a lot of those big grand shots that are unrealistic in a way, and very stage and stuff. Like I touched on before, he did come from a stage, and he brought a lot of that stuff over with him, and it definitely makes its way into his films, including in the set design and then within the flowers and stuff like that. So that's very much a James Wow thing, and something that you do see in a few of his films, especially if you're going to go down the James Wow rabbit hole and have a look at a few more of his films. But yeah, Sankey was known for, to be honest.
Just like the they don't ever really tell you what year it's supposed to be set in, and I just found it hilarious that at one point when people are in a panic because everything's going weird and there's an invisible man running around and now everybody knows about it, somebody's like at a bank and says, "Give me 5 pounds of silver," and I was like, if this is supposed to be contemporary to 1933, was that a thing? Could you walk into a bank and demand 5 pounds of silver?
Yeah. That's true, actually. Do you know what? The amount of times I've seen it, I've never really thought of it like that. But no, you're right.
I noticed strange little things.
They are the little things that sometimes catch you out, right? And you do think, did they have that back then? Did they have that? Yeah, but I guess they did. I guess that was, because I'm pretty sure this is set during the day. it was filmed, right? This is meant to be set in the 1930s. I think everything lines up quite well.
Also, just the okay, so we've been talking about how, like, regardless of what movie we're going to be talking about until maybe the last film, it's still kind of really early on in terms of sound cinema. And
Yes.
as I was I watched it on headphones 3 of the 4 times,
Oh,
and
okay.
the headphones that I have are pretty good. And as I was watching the scene where he's just sort of like wreaking havoc through the town, I think it was the first time I watched it, I took the note where I was like, this must have been almost unbearably cacophonous. And if you only seen a couple of movies before that had any kind of sound at all, just because there were so many layers of whooshing air, of him laughing, of the people screaming, of the crashing of the bikes, of the the destruction that he's causing. And I don't know, man. It impressed me.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. I'm with you. It was, I think that's one of the things that is so easily forgotten when watching these films is how new sound was, how new the role of
I mean,
sound
less than
design
10 years
was.
for everything we're going to be talking about, with the exception of Creature, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Creature's like the 50s, so that was way later.
Yeah.
But yeah, the sound had literally made its way into Hollywood full sound films 5 years previous to this,
Yeah.
6 years previous to this, and wow, I mean, like I said, the role of a sound designer wasn't really a thing, wasn't really, not to this extent. So to have a lot of those sounds in there that now we just completely take for granted, but also the fact that you can watch it and it does hold up when maybe you don't even think about that stuff, really speaks to how well they done.
Right?
Like within a couple of years, they completely developed the template of what sound design in a film should be. Because they could have gone other ways with it, right? They could have gone, okay, we've never had sound before. Do we want this to sound like real life? Do we want this to be where you can hear everything you would in real life? Or are we going to make sound something very surreal? Are we
Mm-hmm.
going to make it so like you can distinguish a film from what you would hear in real life? Like sounds are completely different. And of course, people did play with that. But in terms of like the blueprint of what sound design is and what we use, that hasn't changed. And they come up with that so quickly. And they develop that so quickly. The fact that it stands up today, you can watch this in 2020. You'll be able to watch this in 10 years and it will still work. 20 years and it
Yeah.
will still work. But like it's timeless. And I know that's like way overused. It is so overused. But in terms of the techniques they use for this, they do hold up. Even like we were saying about the Invisible Man visual effects. The fact that they
Yeah.
do still blow you away today. And
I
you
mean,
can,
like, if you've seen more than a couple of movies, you might be able to understand that the way they achieve the effect of him unwrapping himself when everybody's like coming at him is, just sort of like a maquette that somebody standing behind is unwrapping as though it's their own head. But it's still you're like, damn, like, based on everything that I've seen from around here, or even up until this point in this movie, whoa.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's just, there's something about practical effects. And I know, like, oh, maybe, like, you're only in your teens, and for some reason you're listening to us and you're like, CG is the way. You're like, sure, that's the way for you, but I just, there's a reason that people to this day are in love with John Carpenter's The Thing. There's a reason we still talk about An American Werewolf in London. There's a reason people still love Star Wars.
yeah.
It's practical effects.
Well, in terms of
So,
Star Wars, it's gone backwards. It's gone like
The
you had with the
Mandalorian's amazing.
prequels.
Oh
Well, yeah,
god.
but you had the prequels where George Lucas was trying to use all this CGI, and there's definitely talent involved in CG, and there's definitely CG artists that are better than other artists. There are people that understand the media a lot better than others.
Mm.
But I think in terms of like practical effects and doing stuff practically and then developing the ways in which to do that, there's real genius behind it. There is real talent behind it. To the point, not everyone can do it. I don't think everyone can just learn how to do that. I think you're either born with a talent to be able to do that stuff, or you just don't have it. Where I think with CG, for the most part, you can learn that, right? You can learn. It's a computer program. You can learn the individual steps.
Okay.
With practical effects, you've got to have some real artistry to it. You've got to have some real. You are literally creating something with your hands, and there isn't that many.
To be fair, there are many people who will argue, and to be honest, like I do feel like, just because they're using a computer as their canvas doesn't mean that they're not still artists. Like they still have work, they're still creative.
Oh no, I'm not saying.
No,
that
I'm not. I know
definitely
you're not,
I
but I'm
definitely
saying
think
like
awesome.
it's a common thing where people will be like, well, they're just using a computer. Yeah, that's not a valid argument, because the artistry still needs to be there. It still needs to be in them. It's just the brush or the pencil or just the medium of the art is different than someone who appreciates as deeply as someone who dedicates their entire life to it. That being said, like every now and then we get the lions in I Am Legend, but then every now and then we get something as impressive as Smaug in The Hobbit, or we get something as impressive as you can't tell when CG is used to augment things, like
Yeah, I definitely think there's a place. I definitely think there's a place for CGI.
oh
Without
yeah,
a doubt. I like, as a filmthere
I think it needs to
feel
be
there's
used
a
to
place for
augment more
CGI.
than it needs to be used as the medium. That's how I
Yeah,
feel about
yeah.
it.
It's definitely there is definitely artistry in there, but I don't think the artistry is as unique as practical effects can
Okay,
be.
well, humor me for a couple of minutes here, and feel free to do whatever you want with this. But uh, you personally have experience with this, so your film Darkness, like, it's a giant uh, dude in a suit, creature, cool thing that you augmented with CG. How did you decide that you were going to augment it with CG? How much CG? Blah 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 blah. Go.
So with Darkness, I always knew it was going to be a mixture of both, because you could go with full CG, right? But if you're gonna do something full CG, you've got to understand two things. One, you are going to need a lot of money, and probably a team of visual effects artists that are going to pull that off, right? You go and look at any film with a really impressive visual effects character, a visual effects creation. You look at the team that worked on it. Right? On a blockbuster, it's hundreds of people, absolutely hundreds of people. So you're going to know you're going to have a lot of money for that, which obviously I didn't have. But and two, and probably more importantly, when you create something for real, as we did with Darkness for the most part, like you said, it was a guy in makeup. That's real. That is going to look as good as that looks in 2020 for the rest of the time. Right? If I'm lucky enough that someone watches that film in 30 years, Darkness will look as good as it does in them, because a bit like we're saying about Frankenstein, right? Like, you look at Frankenstein and they have never ever done that makeup any better. The
I would
Invisible
have
Man.
to agree with that.
The
There's
Invisible
something
Man.
to be said about the De Niro version, but at the same time, not so
Yeah.
much.
No. Right, exactly. But the Invisible Man, they've definitely improved on those techniques, because you do design those applications on a computer. Computers are constantly getting better. Computers constantly outdate themselves. They get faster, they get better, they get more intelligent.
Exponentially. It's terrifying.
Right,
The Matrix,
exactly.
y'all. The Matrix.
Right. So for me, that was always the question. And then in terms of just from a filmmaking point of view, for those that have seen Black Mass, for those that haven't, the character of Darkness is seen in full glory right at the end of the film. It's the big reveal. If you get to that big reveal at the end of your film, and what I've been building to this whole time looks like shit, we don't have a film. It don't matter how good everything is before that. If you get to Darkness and you're not impressed, or you don't buy it because it looks fucking terrible, you haven't got a film. Your film's done. You haven't got a film. So I always knew that practical effects was the way to go, and then there is certain things that I couldn't achieve with practical effects. So the film is called Black Mass, and that refers to the black mass that surrounds the lead character of Charlie, and the black mass that surrounds the character of Darkness. So obviously I can't really do that practically. So I knew that was always going to be a visual effect. And also Darkness floats, right? Darkness is something that floats through the air. So the black mass is something that floats through the air. Again, couldn't really achieve that practically.
Well, how about this? I've seen your film a few times, and I've known this title for I don't even know how long, and it's just now occurred. I always, because I was raised as Catholic as I was. You said Black Mass, and I just kept waiting for something to be churchy, and I didn't even know why it was called Black Mass. Do you mean a black mass isn't a mass is a thing? Anyway, I'm just having that realization. Continue.
There you go. Do you know? I wonder how many people. I think a few people that listen to this podcast have seen Black Mass, so I wonder how many people are going to drop down in the comments now saying that they never understood why it was called Black Mass either. But yes, that's why it's called Black Mass, because it's the black mass that surrounds Charlie and the black mass that is pulling him in. That's why I decided to have a mixture, and I always think that's best. To be honest, I always think, or even if you're going to do full-on CG characters, putting them in a real world always works well. Say what you want about Michael Bay. The reason some of the Transformers look so good is because he films everything in a real city and then puts them in a real city. So when you're watching that, your mind is like, well, I know that stuff's real. So maybe I can see it, right? And then you buy it. Okay. And then that's why, like, and then he kind of bloody undoes it in the later films. So that's why when you see the like Cybertron stuff, looks like shit because it's all CGI.
To be okay, so like, okay. I didn't see the fifth, maybe even the fourth one. I don't know. I saw a couple. I saw the first Mark. I saw through the first Mark Wahlberg, and then I didn't see the second or third, if there's a third. But I did see Bumblebee and actually really liked it. And there's some really good Bumblebee Cybertron stuff in that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. But that's good because they don't try and make it look too realistic. Because they're trying to match it up to the old cartoons and stuff, right? Yeah. So that's the other thing with CGI is and I know this was meant to be an Invisible Man podcast, but it's turned into a CGI.
It still is an Invisible Man podcast.
No, it is.
The bulk of what we're talking about. We're getting back there.
No, it is.
We're still us, so we have to do this.
But that's the. Have you ever heard of the Uncanny Valley?
100%. I know what you're talking about.
Right.
But
so
elaborate for people who don't know.
So with the Uncanny Valley, it's the idea of creating something that we know as real, something we've seen with our own eyes. Our brain knows exactly what that looks like, the textures, how that feels, how that moves. And there's something that we don't know. So, for instance, if you were to create a CGI human or a CGI dog, for example, it is very, very hard to trick your mind into believing that's real because you know exactly what that looks like. So a lot of people give the example of the reason Gollum from Lord of the Rings is one of the best CGI characters of all time is because he really dances on the edge of that uncanny valley. He is humanoid. We kind of get it, but there's enough there that we're like, okay, we know you're not real. So it's a lot easier to buy that, right? But then when someone's a CGI human, like some shots in Neo in The Matrix 2 or 3.
Oh, I mean, I love Reloaded, and I know I'm in the minority, but damn, that fight with the million of the Agent Smiths, like, it's a cool fight.
It's the movement.
Damn, that was worse than my PlayStation. Sorry.
Well, we know exactly what that looks like. We know exactly how that's meant to move. You've seen fight scenes. You've seen how people move. Doesn't matter how fantastical it's meant to be. We've seen that. It's very, very hard to trick us into believing that's real.
Okay.
So we're never ever going to buy that's real because unless it looks perfectly photoreal, it's so hard for us to buy that because the weight of stuff, the physics of it all is never quite right. But you can get away with it with fictional characters that don't exist. some monsters and stuff like that, you can get away with that stuff because we don't really know what that stuff looks like. We have no idea. So that's why you can get away with dragons and stuff like that, because we've never seen a fucking dragon. We don't know what a dragon looks like. We don't know what a dragon moves. We have an idea, but you don't really know, do you? You've never actually seen one.
Dragons are another topic for another time, because aren't dragons one of the only things that appear in every single culture's mythology? I'm pretty sure they are.
Oh, that's a good point. Maybe.
Oh, no, I don't mean to like derail it completely, and we won't, and we'll get back to what we're talking about being the Invisible Man. But yeah, no,
possibly.
Psychology fascinates me, as I'm sure it does you. And one of the things I discovered while researching is, I think, there's like every culture sort of has. Sorry, I giggled like that. Every culture seems to have a vagina dentata myth, and every culture seems to have the creatures that with the giant teeth that will get you in the darkness myth, and every culture seems to have the dragon myth. And if every culture has them, there has to be some kernel of truth somewhere. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of what else crosses along cultures and myths. Actually, maybe like the Yeti, like Bigfoot.
I almost said Bigfoot, but yeah, Bigfoot is real close.
Yeah, because
I mean, what we think of as Bigfoot maybe is quite a bit more contemporary. Maybe since that film from the '70s, but like the myth of the oversized, extra hairy human ape person type thing, 100%.
Well, like you were saying, the idea of it all comes from a place in reality. I genuinely believe that with Bigfoot.
Oh yeah.
There's definitely some reality to that. If that reality still exists today, I don't know. I'm not saying that that's true, but I think in myths and legends, there's definitely some crossover between what would become humans and evolution. Probably went another way with some animals, right? That become something like Bigfoot. And I think there have been discoveries made actually of humanoids that took a different path, let's say. So yeah, I think that's probably where those legends come from. And then you could argue maybe dragons come from dinosaurs, when people would discover the fossils of dinosaurs.
Oh yeah. So they'd be like, well, this must have been a dragon. Yeah, no,
it must have been a dragon. Yeah, exactly. Right, let's bring this back around to the Invisible Man.
Oh, we're such nerds. But no, seriously. Okay, so bringing it back to like
it's going to be interesting to see what people think of that, because I'm definitely leaving it in.
Oh yeah, you have to. They'll be like, why is this one twice as long? You'll see.
Yeah. You'll see. Yeah. All right. We've been going for over it.
Okay, so like the intensity, this movie, man, like you're watching it today and you'd be like, man, this fool is telling him everything like a Bond villain. But at the same time, like he tells them that he's about to tie him to the fucking car and then send the car over the cliff. And guess what? That's exactly what he does. And you see it. And
you do see it.
I'm not going to say there's zero chance, but I'm almost willing to bet a healthy amount of money that there's zero chance that there was the chaos level committed to film in this film before this film.
Okay. So, on that, funnily enough, that on that scene, do you know the scene where he ties him in the car,
right,
and sends him on his way? Do you know why? Did you read anything about why that scene exists in the film?
No.
So they believe the reason that exists in the film is because James Whale wanted to have a much darker ending to Frankenstein, where either the other lover or Frankenstein himself or Baron Frankenstein die. But obviously everyone survives that film, right? You get to the end, it's a happy ending, because that's what Universal wanted. So when he got the opportunity to make this, he was like, nope, I am killing as many people as possible, and essentially kills everyone. Like no one really makes it out of this film, did they?
Yeah.
So that was his idea of like, everyone is going. And also we're gonna bring this up in a few episodes time, but originally Universal didn't want James Whale to make this film. They wanted him to make
James Whale to make the film, or they didn't want to make the film, period?
Both, really, because what they wanted is they wanted James Whale to make a sequel to Frankenstein, and he didn't want to. He didn't want to make a sequel to anything. I think Bride of Frankenstein's the only sequel he ever made. He didn't like the idea of sequels. So he never wanted to do it. And he wanted to make The Invisible Man. He wanted to really adapt the H.G. Wells novel, which I believed Universal already owned, but they didn't want to adapt a novel. They purely wanted the name and to be able to advertise it under H.G. Wells because of the the press that would come with that. But they had no intention of straight up adapting it or using a lot of the book. They just wanted to use the name and H.G. Wells' name. But Wow really wanted to kind of adapt the book. And yeah, he did change some stuff. I believe the novel is set in the 1890s, and this film, like we said, I believe takes place in 1933, 1932, maybe. Yeah, so he changes a few little bits, but for the most part, it's, from what I understand, it's the same as the novel. And he got Universal to agree to allow him to make this film and to have complete control over this film if he then later made a sequel, which would become The Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh, there you go. And we won't get into it right now, but we'll save it for one of those bonus Patreon episodes. But I can't say enough about how much I appreciate the way that they rebooted The Invisible Man this year, being 2020. And if you're going to reboot something, the Blumhouse Invisible Man is the way to do it.
Yes. Yes.
So you were just touching on the ending, and I've taken the note every time thus far, but never said it because I was hoping maybe at some point a film would break it, and this is the one that did it. Every single one of these movies to this point ended so abruptly that I took the note that, like, why does this end like this so abruptly every single time I watched every single one of these other films? And this is the first one to have what I would consider, a contemporary denouement, as opposed to all of them ending with, I'm dead, and now credits. This is like, oh, I'm injured. Now I'm gonna say a few words, then credits. I'm like, oh well, at least it wasn't out of nowhere. But then again, there is something to be said for horror that ends out of nowhere, as does life often. So
well, I think that was very much of the time. I think that was very much of the time. If you go back and watch any film from this era, not just horror, classic film in general from the 30s,
really,
a lot of them do. Yeah, a lot of them do
okay.
end quite abruptly, because I think that's just what the audience were used to. The audience wanted their story. They wanted to see the story come to an end. They wanted to get out. There was no, there was no like wrapping up that story. There was no like 3-4 different bloody false endings.
I don't need 17 endings a la Return of the King, but an ending would be nice.
Yes, yeah, and you definitely get there. I think, as you said, you start to see that coming true in this film, and then it definitely extends itself out a little bit more as we move into the 40s. But yeah, that was for whatever reason, and I guess it was just down to the audience of the day. That's just what they were into, really. Yeah, it was just what sold, because again, film wasn't, in terms of like feature film, in terms of like going to sitting in a cinema for like over an hour, that hadn't been around that long, really. It wasn't like, when cinemas first come back, it was like short films, basically. A lot of those silent films are very short films, and maybe you would have a couple of them stacked up, and you would go in the cinema, you would watch them. You might walk out after one or two of them, but you would, in terms of like going in and watching a feature film, quite new actually. It wasn't as well used as it is today. Certainly not. So yeah, dude, let's move on to wrapping this up. I think we've taken people's
let these nice people go home.
Yes,
or go on with their day.
Go on with their day. So what else? Is there anything else that stood out to you? Any little bits of trivia you want to throw out before we go?
I don't know if you've ever seen that movie from the 80s, Repo Man, but I think the cans of beer just say beer, the box of cereal just say cereal. And I immediately thought of Repo Man with the first shot we get behind the bar where there's just barrels of liquor labeled by type, a la rum, tequila, vodka. So that made me giggle. I appreciated that quite a bit. Oh, when the Invisible Man pushes the patriarch of the establishment down the stairs, and the woman and his wife comes in hysterics.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I was like, whoa, that seems like a fairly realistic and amount of blood on that man's head for 1933.
It was very well done. If it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if that was real. People did get injured quite a lot on films back in the day because, if you were falling down the stairs, you were falling down the stairs.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, on that note, and I think that is a great segue, Michael, into the last point I'm going to bring up. You actually touched on it earlier, and it is matched to what you just said. So obviously in this film, the Invisible Man is quite ruthless and does some horrible stuff. And you touched on earlier that he is responsible for derailing a train, which is said in the movie that it kills 100 people.
Yeah.
Because of that train, within this film, the Invisible Man actually kills more people than any other Universal monster.
100%.
So who would have thought that, eh? Who if you get asked in a pub quiz or a bar quiz which Universal monster is the most bloodthirsty, it turns out to be the Invisible Man.
Yeah.
Apparently, by some distance as well. By some distance, because not that many people.
It's a whole lot.
Yeah, within the context of a film, he kills something like 125 people. So quite a lot. But yeah, dude, I think that is certainly a way to end it. I don't know if that's a good way to end it, but that is where I'm going to end it. So
we need to end it somehow.
We do need to end it somehow. That's as good a place as any, right? Yeah, it's been a pleasure, sir. I'm so glad you enjoyed this one.
Oh man, so much.
Being James Wow is always a huge benefit, and I definitely think that at some point, you teased it earlier, we'll definitely do some of his other films for the Patreon, and probably do a comparison to the Blumhouse version actually, because I really did like that version they done. I was a little bit unsure of how they were going to do it.
It was I think it was the second to last movie I saw before everything went crazy. Right. My lady and I actually pulled a double feature of The Invisible Man and The Hunt, I think in that order, and then it was the next week when everything went absolutely nuts.
Shut down.
Yeah,
man, definitely. We definitely have to do a comparison. They're very different films, very different
they
films.
Are.
But it's a great modern take on. We'll get into it. We'll get into it another time.
Some other time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. A bit of a longer episode this time, and we went off the rails a little bit, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If not, then let us know
if you agree. We'll try to avoid it next time.
We'll stick to the script next time.
Thank you everybody for listening. If you get any kind of enjoyment out of it, let your friends know. Give us that follow, that retweet, and if you have any extra scratch, maybe take a look at the Patreon.
Till next time, Horror Hounds, stay safe.
Take care of yourself.
Bye.